touch base with Professor Latham on this. Professor Latham, there's a great American movie which I'm sure you've seen. It's called The Dark Knight, and the villain of the piece says that sometimes all the world needs is a little bit of chaos. So we are living in interesting times. If you ask me to dissect them neatly, I can't because yes, you have the Iranians sitting there and the Turks and the Pakistanis, but you also have India sitting there, and then there's Putin and there's Xi Jinping, who now is saying that he's the supporter of free trade and a rules based world order, and it seems Donald Trump is the opposite, and the Americans want to uproot free trade. I'm sure as an academic you are also finding the times rather interesting, but how do we laymen dissect them?
Well, first of all, that's apparently a very old Scottish curse. May you live in interesting times. Other countries have appropriated it as well, of course. Um, Look, when you look at the ocean, it's easy to see the froth on top and to not see the deep and powerful currents below the surface. And when we look at this summit, it's the froth. It's a theatrical froth. It's full of rhetoric, but it misses the underlying, what's going on powerfully beneath the surface. And that's what's been going on forever, which is countries will pursue their own national interests. When those national interests align, they will get along. And when they don't align, there'll be friction and conflict and sometimes war. Why does that matter? Because India and China don't have exactly the same interests. China does want to build a new world order. It wants it to be Sinocentric. It doesn't want it to be liberal. It doesn't want it to have anything to do with democracy promotion or anything like. It certainly has nothing to do with free trade. It is a very Sinocentric hub and spoke system with China at the center. India has no time for that, which is why at the end of the day, India's deep interests lie with Russia, and Russia brought India into supported its accession to the SCO explicitly as a means of balancing China within the SCO, because it didn't want to be in bed, as it were, with this 800-pound elephant. And so that means that India has interests that align with those of the United States. Now, when you say these are interesting times, they are interesting times. They're interesting in this way. The old order is dead or dying. The new order has yet to be born, and we live in a time of monsters. I'm quoting Antonio Gramsci, famous Italian philosopher there. And a time of monsters is, we just don't know. It's a time of hybrids. It's a time of kind of innovating, but not doing a good job of it. And I think that's where we are. That's what the SCO is, and that's what the BRICS
okay,
is.
I obviously fundamentally agree with you that the arc of history is long and it's bending in a direction which is inevitable. Can we find commonalities between the Indian structure and the Chinese structure? The answer is no. Should logic perforce point us in a direction that says that yes, the new world order should actually be based not on the Atlantic Charter but an Indo-Pacific Charter, and the right people to sign that charter would be an Indian Prime Minister, an American President? I would be a strong proponent of this, in fact have been for 20 years. But the issue that we are facing is that, as you said, froth, which is causing a bit of confusion and chaos, and that might be a good thing for the world. Sometimes it's nice to shake things up a little, which Donald Trump is doing. But when does it sink in that we have now in principle issues? Because a conversation on tariffs is a legitimate conversation, and a conversation on India investing in the US and buying more aircraft and howitzers and generating therefore more jobs or keeping more jobs in the US, these are legitimate conversations and they should be happening. That's why free trade works. Specialization, areas of opportunity and advantage versus what we need versus what you can provide. Now, it's become, unfortunately, about principle, and the principle is a difficult one. We've had a terror attack in India, and the guy we think set it in motion is sitting and having dinner in the White House. It's a principled conversation. We don't understand what the 25% extra punishment tariff is, because none of us are being able to understand how we created the war in Ukraine. If you take away Russian oil and gas and Iranian oil and gas from the global markets, oil prices will double, triple. That's bad for the world. So, in the principled argument, how do we walk away from it? How do we get back to logic and reasonable conversations on tariff and geopolitics?
The short answer is let's wait 3.5 years, and then you know who
That's
won't be
I
in the
thought that's
White
the long answer. That's not the answer I wanted to hear.
Yeah. Well, but because this is a time of the old order has fallen apart, and it's not Trump's fault. It's been happening for a while, and it's what comes next is important. And Trump seems to think it's going to be a hub and spoke arrangement with the United States at the center. That's not going to work because India and China and Russia and Brazil and South, I mean, nobody's going to put up with that anymore. Once upon a time, the United States turned a blind eye to tariffs because it paid the price for a liberal international economic system that it ultimately benefited from, even if it suffered imbalances in terms of tariffs and whatnot. That America is gone. The United States, for I think bad reasons, but understandable reasons, is no longer willing to pay the price to uphold the liberal international economic order. And it's playing the game everybody else is playing, which is me, looking out for my own narrow self-interests, not my broader self-interests. That wasn't the case in 1945, and it wasn't the case in 1991, and it wasn't the case even 10 years ago, but it's the case now. The United States no longer paying the cost to uphold a system which it ultimately benefited from and, importantly, reflected its interests and its values, right? The promotion of democracy and things like that. That's dead. That's dead. And now China wants to put something in its place. India is sort of on board, but not entirely because it doesn't want to be a lackey of China.
Okay.
The Russians are playing some other game altogether, something out of the 19th century. This is a time of monsters.
Well, when we start quoting aphorisms to each other is when we understand that in practice it is not an easy, practical, pragmatic, this all should make sense. We've all become philosophical, and as I was mentioning, Socrates comes to mind in knowing that I know nothing, because everything that I thought I knew in the past 20 years is getting so rapidly upended that yes, of course, it doesn't make sense that we are taking photographs with Shahbaz Sharif of Pakistan. How does that make sense for India? We have an existential crisis with the Chinese. The territorial dispute is not a minor one. It's tens of thousands of square miles. The Chinese arm and supply our biggest enemies. They provided the nuclear weapons to North Korea and Pakistan. Pakistan then shipped them across to Iran. It is an existential issue. Can you still do trade? Of course you can. The Americans do trade with the Chinese. We do trade with the Chinese, and it's large, and we lose $100 billion a year. We profit from the American trade actually. But is it making sense? No, it isn't. So you heard it there that of course the overstretched, the W2 mechanism doesn't work anymore. It isn't working. Donald Trump says that it doesn't work. The NATO mechanism, Donald Trump says, doesn't work. The UN mechanism, Donald Trump says, doesn't work. The UN Secretary General is sitting in Beijing talking to the Chinese president and asking for his support to keep the UN system going. So that's a system that's not working. So yeah, the old world order as it existed refused to adapt. The UNSC did not adapt, and then you start slowly dying. But are you already dead, and is that a good thing? Open question. Let me get Ambassador Goyal back into this conversation. Ambassador Goyal, so I don't want to get lost in it. We just like in the lowest of the lows, nobody can wish away the $19 trillion behemoth that is China. They're not going to go away. You and I still have Chinese products lying in our houses because those are the ones that are available in the market. That's the truth. That is what it is. Similarly, we can't wish the Americans disappear, nor can the Americans wish that the Indians would come to heel and lick their boots. So it is what it is. So in the very real pragmatic world, this summit ends today. Narendra Modi returns to India in a few hours, and then he's got to get on with life here. We are still not in good communication with the United States. A lot of rhetoric, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, is still coming. How do we actually say, let's stop? Okay, I'm sorry to